Hey guys, welcome back to the Science MythBusters podcast. Today we are going to address the myths regarding hypnosis. We have gathered here today two of McMaster University students, Michael and Brienne, as well as a hypnotist stage performer and a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm going to turn it over for a few questions starting with Michael.
So thank you, Abinu, for the kind introduction. So just a little bit more background information about myself. I'm a fourth-year student in McMaster. I'm a kinesiology student, and the only reason I'm a little bit interested in hypnosis is because I did a first-year project for a psychology course where I did a little basic presentation on hypnosis, but it was all very superficial. I didn't go into any details. I mainly used popular science articles, quick Google searches to do a lot of my to find a lot of my information. So I just wanted to ask you a question. A couple questions, the hypnotist entertainer. About would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I never caught your name. What was it again?
Michael.
Michael. Okay. So I'm Mark. I've been an entertainer, performer / hypnotist for the last 10 or so years. And I usually, at least currently, I perform in Niagara about 3 or 4 shows a week. And I've been doing that for the last couple of years as well. And I hope I can answer any questions you have. So I'm excited to hear what you're going to ask.
Okay, perfect. So the first question I have is just about the whole idea of manipulation. So I was just wondering, a lot of the times when I was doing a lot of my Google searches, a lot of them were saying things about how hypnosis is commonly understood as manipulation, and how it's all just done unconsciously. The person is completely under control. They don't have any sort of individual ability to jump in and say, oh, I'm not going to raise my hand because you said so, or whatever it is. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can imagine with all the shows and all the movies and everything, it makes it look like they have almost no control of what they're doing. They're completely unconscious. They're like zombies that are just listening to advice or listening to suggestions. And I'm sure it can look like that, but that's not the case almost at all. People are consciously aware. They're not unconscious. They're not asleep or anything. They are awake. So they can consciously decide not to do things. Also, all hypnosis generally is the state of more so deep relaxation. So but you're not unconscious. But again, you're in this deep relaxation and you're very suggestible to cues and verbal suggestions. So if I were to make certain comments, you would be more inclined to listen to them. But doesn't mean you would follow them per se. You are conscious of your surroundings and so on.
Okay, so I guess you could just refer to me as I still have the control over my own actions, right?
Yeah,
if I'm being hypnotized?
You can decide to actively not do what I'm telling you.
Okay, because I found that's actually interesting because I found a website, this quick Google search to find this website, where it talks about simple mind control techniques. So clearly the author's convinced that that's how hypnosis is. And it actually says exactly, you carry out hypnosis every day without even realizing you're doing it. This happens when you like a person, you tend to follow them. So it's and then he goes on talking about how there's so many basic examples of things if there's someone that you like, you'll just say yes to them for any favor that they ask for just because it's that. So is that actually hypnosis, or is that just false stuff?
I wouldn't really call that hypnosis. I think it makes the definition of hypnosis too general to just any form of suggestion. Just because someone in conversation you're beginning to mimic them doesn't mean you're being hypnotized. You're just open to mimicking body language and suggestions in general. Because hypnosis usually requires you to be in a much more deep state of suggestion or just relaxation in general, so that you can be suggested. And you mimicking someone is not you being hypnotized. They're not. I wouldn't correlate them or make them say they're the same thing.
Okay, so then I had a question regarding ethical dilemmas. So doesn't that mean that for example, any sort of hypnotist like you, for example, can just abuse being able to hypnotize someone, right, who's very open to suggestion? Can't you just get them to do anything, or is there a line where you just draw it and say, you know what, okay, they can't, you can't get them to do this or that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So generally, it's again, we were talking about how you can't consciously make someone do something. So I think a really good example, it's a very common trick I've done before, is that let's say you have a watch. Let's say you have a watch, and I want to take the watch from you, and I ask for the watch while you're being hypnotized, and you actively do not want to give me the watch, and you can consciously decide to not give me the watch despite me trying to make suggestions of you giving it to me. But I can also make a suggestion that the watch belongs to me. And then afterwards, after the fact, I can ask for the watch, as in I'm asking back for my own watch, and you'd be very inclined to give it back to me. And that's the way in which you can manipulate hypnosis. But in the right hands, and usually when it's used in clinical practice and so on, that's not the goal of it. So you have to be careful, and usually, but however, if you are by yourself, you can actually kind of be manipulated by someone.
Okay, so I see. So I guess just like quickly to summarize, it's just pretty much saying that hypnosis is not mind control. So that's just a myth that goes around all over the internet. Yeah. So I had another question regarding another common misconception I see everywhere. The whole idea of how hypnosis actually like weakens the mind and like kind of puts you in trance. And I don't really have like an opinion on it. I just see it a lot of videos, like for example, a lot of YouTube videos that I've seen about hypnosis. You know, the person gets hypnotized and then they kind of just go back to their seat. Just like what happens after that? You know what I mean? Like what happens in terms of like brain activity or anything like that? What after the fact?
So you realize in like the other article, the other question you had, you asked about like, is this like hypnosis when they're just like you're talking to someone and you're mimicking them? And I said that's not really hypnosis, but you still go into a state that's similar to hypnosis, that deep relaxation state, very frequently. Maybe not when you're talking to someone, but more so, let's say like before you fall asleep or while you're trying to fall asleep. You get very relaxed to the point where you'd be in like a similar mental state as you would be when you're trying to get hypnotized. And like there's a lot of studies that talked about a variety of different waves that you are in, like your brain waves, and it correlates to how conscious you are. And then, for example, you have these alpha waves. There are alpha, beta, and theta waves. Theta waves are the ones that where it's like right before you lose consciousness, and that has been shown to be strongly correlated when you're meditating, and also present when you're in a hypnotic state. So even meditation you can be in a very similar state to hypnosis, and essentially after you meditate, you're fine. Like nothing happens to your brain after you meditate or after your eyes are falling asleep. It's still normal. They don't change their behavior, and all that stuff doesn't change because they've just been hypnosis.
Okay, yeah, I guess so. I think I mean I guess it would have just taken a little bit more like research, and I would have found, because a lot of them are targeting this as like a common misconception that people just go up there and it kind of like, you know, for example, they snap their fingers and they tell them sleep, and it's like you know, what happens after the fact, right? Are they just, you know, now they snap out of it and they just go back to the sea? So I guess it's just a matter of them being more subjective or more suggestive to like any suggestions or anything that they give them by just being in a more relaxed state. So that's pretty, but they're still in control of what they're doing.
To summarize, they are in control of what they're doing. They're conscious of their surroundings. So I cannot manipulate them directly. I can only do it very indirectly. And lastly, that it's a normal process, and you can go through similar situations in daily life, and that their brains not change in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Michael and Mark, for a thoughtful discussion on the misconceptions surrounding hypnosis. You guys addressed some of the most common ones that any student would encounter. I can still think of a few more that Peter and Brianne would like to address.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Brianne. I'm a second-year life science student at McMaster. Hypnosis to me is just a very interesting topic, so I just wanted to get more information on it. And I have with me the clinical hypnotherapist, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, Abhinav also introduced me, and thanks, Brian, for the introduction. But I'm a clinical hypnotherapist with a doctor of hypnotherapy, and I practice at the University of Toronto. I'm here to answer any of your questions. I'm going to be referencing like a lot of literature and a lot of like, you know, papers and stuff, because that's pretty much my work. So I'll answer your questions that way. So I don't want to like bog your mind with too much science. But I mean, we'll go through as many misconceptions as you find, because I know this area can be quite confusing for a lot of people. So.
Awesome. Okay, so the first thing, I came across an article, and it suggested that someone in undergoing hypnosis will regress spontaneously to the roots of their emotional problems. So for example, like a child who has a traumatic history may recall those suppressed memories. Is this actually true? And if it is, wouldn't there be a number of ethical dilemmas associated with administering hypnosis?
Well, yeah, like that's a pretty interesting point. What you're pretty much talking about is like the Freudian theory. It's derived from like the Freudian psychoanalysis theory.
Okay.
And it pretty much, it's the theory of repression. And it says that some traumatic experiences are so painful to remember that once someone enters like an altered state of consciousness or the subconscious, that those memories will like kind of rise to the forefront and will dominate their brain. And that they can, and those, of course, those memories can be good, they can be bad. So in the case, it would be an ethical dilemma if it was really traumatic, which is what you're bringing up. And in my practice, I found that isn't true. And there's like a lot of literature to back that up as well. So most of the literature that is against like that kind of theory, because it's a theory that has some merit because it was there for so long, but once again, it is old and it is based on Freudian psychology, which has been developed on. But essentially, these memories are repressed. The memories that are repressed are actually false. So a lot of times it isn't recall of memories, of childhood memories. It's actually like invention of false memories. And that alone has also been disproven as well. Because the invention of false memories isn't a measurable thing. So a lot of patients will report that they've thought of some horrific thing that happened in the past. And then when you inquire about it further through studies, through other measures that we have, psychometrics, you find that these are not actual real memories. They don't remember anything of it except for that one time that they thought they remembered something.
Okay, so just to clarify, it's not actually bringing up suppressed memories, and if it does, those memories are actually false?
Yeah, the memories are actually false, and the case of traumatic memories are pretty small. Like there were actually studies done on this. I can reference one of the Norwegian studies. It pulled in so many studies, like many European countries. It's a really good PubMed study, and it talks about the treatment, like hypnosis and hypnotherapy is a treatment for a lot of childhood disorders, and a lot of these disorders are psychological, so obsessive compulsive, psychosis, learning disorders, and they usually have positive benefits. So if there are traumatic childhood memories that are brought up, they're usually false and they're usually fabricated by the brain, and it isn't specific to hypnosis. So that's generally a myth.
Okay, so hypnosis is actually beneficial, and it can actually treat these things.
In the large case, it is beneficial for most patients. Yeah.
Okay, so one more question. I took a quiz actually recently just to see if I was susceptible to hypnosis, and it did say that I was. So it asked me things such as like whether I would prefer reading or shopping, if I spend more time on social media or doing homework, and how gullible I am and things like that. So is this implying that anyone who is more gullible or less intelligent is actually more easily subject to hypnosis?
Well, I want to ask you, like, what was the source of this quiz?
So it was actually an online website. It's called Quiz Oni. I don't know.
So it's like a quiz website that has multiple quizzes for different things.
Exactly.
It's not specific to hypnosis or anything, right? Okay. And you took it, you went through the whole thing, and what was the result?
So it did say that I was susceptible to suggestion. So I can actually read what it said. So it's not actually coming up, but just to summarize, it did say I'm more susceptible to suggestion, and I may not easily be hypnotized, but if someone were to try, it would likely happen, just not on like a regular basis.
Right. So I guess what they're trying to do is they're trying to just relate like gullibility, impressionability, some sort of intelligence, trying to relate that to like how susceptible you are to hypnosis. And like, what were the kinds of questions, like the basics, like? So
like, if I do like more shopping, it asked how gullible I was. There's some questions about whether I would prefer like going for walks or reading, stuff like that.
Well, first I want to like question the like validity of these kinds of quizzes because they're not psychometrically tested.
Right.
They're not validated in labs, controlled experiments. So I would be very hesitant to actually conclude anything definitive off of this. But there are some interesting points that that are brought up in the study. Some interesting concerns that I can see why people might be, I guess, deceived into believing that only stupid people or not unintelligent people can be hypnotized. Well, I'm actually going to for this point, I'm going to reference a study that was done in Germany in Ludwig University. So they actually did a really interesting study where they took really big sample size, 100 plus students, and they were high school and post-secondary students. So they had a pretty good sample size for this one, and a diverse sample size. And it was also stratified like on sex, so the sex differences were minimal. And they actually found that no correlations were observed for the overall sample unselected by sex, because the males had a negative correlation for intelligence and hypnosis, meaning that the less intelligent you were, the more likely you were to be hypnotized. Okay. And the opposite was observed for females, but it was such an insignificant difference, and the differences also canceled themselves out. So like in order to make a general conclusion, they would have to have said that there was no observable difference whatsoever.
So intelligence plays no role on hypnosis.
Yeah, and if it does play a role, it's minimal, and it could probably be ascribed to just chance or randomness.
Okay.
Since the sample size is in like 10,000 or 100,000, it's 100 is still decent.
Makes sense. Thank you for that.
And what I find interesting with the study is that they measured like hypnotizability, right? So what they did was they stratified 100 participants, 92 students, and 8 students attended like different settings. In the group with 92 students, they administered the hypnotizability test, and then right after the hypnotizability test, they administered the intelligence test. And the hypnotizability test was like developed by Harvard, so we know it's reliable and valid, not because it was produced by Harvard, but because it's widely used in psychometrics, so that we know it's valid. And we also have proven that it's a valid measure for group scheming, and by we I mean the scientific field, because I also do a little bit of work, research and stuff. So it consists of 12 pass-fail items. They answered them, and they related to intelligence, some sort of IQ test, and it was also good because it put sort of the students into categories. So it wasn't just a continuous thing, which is a better predictor of stuff like that.
Okay.
But I was curious, like, do you have any other things that you want to? And also, how convinced are you of my arguments?
I think that made a lot more sense. It really clarified a lot of the questions I had. I think I have a better understanding on hypnosis, and I feel like the fact that you did use all of these literature sources, I trust what you're saying over something like an online quiz
Right.
or articles that I've been
And
reading.
being a clinical hypnotherapist at the University of Toronto, I kind of do this with my my patients as well. I like to
Right.
present them the literature and things like
Yeah.
that, just to reassure them that what we're doing is it's worth their time pretty much,
Exactly.
and that it actually works and nothing. And I mean, some of the misconceptions are that it's negative. So I also want to dispel the rumors that it could be a negative experience, because we know that that's not the case most of the time.
Perfect.
And if it is, it's usually random. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
Once again, I think Brianne and Peter addressed those misconceptions on hypnosis very effectively. I think that wraps it up for this episode of Science Mythbusters podcast. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next week.